SEC camp intel. I want to start in Baton Rouge tonight. LSU's running backs have to be better. Now, if you're an LSU Tiger fan, you know that. If you are, let's say, a college football fan and you watched LSU last year, but it's been a year now, it's been several months, and so you don't really remember exactly the details of why they were so poor on the field. You just remember that they were poor last year. Well, it wasn't one glaring area. It was like 5 of them. But running back was one of them. And it feels like, even though they're listed as, I think both are sophomores, but even though they're not listed as seniors, it feels like John Emery has been around forever. It feels like Ty Davis-Price. Those are names that have been around forever, and it feels like every week I'm sitting there and I'm feeling like that's the week, or in the case of a whole season, this is the season that those guys are going to erupt. It's not for lack of ability, but for a number of contributing reasons. Hasn't happened yet over the course of a full season. Hasn't happened yet. Well, boy, does this need to be that season. Now, I felt this way before Miles Brennan went down, whether he was going to win that starting job at quarterback or not. But when he does go down, which he has now, it thins out that quarterback room again. What once looked to be a massive depth strength for them is now Max Johnson and a true freshman in Garrett Nussmeier. It puts even more of a premium on them being able to run the ball. Now, that's always going to be key for LSU football, but you have a couple of added dynamics here that they have to have. These are not either ors. You know, these are not debatable. These are have-to-haves for LSU. The ability to control a game and then the ability to close a game. They couldn't do either one last year. They got to be able to do that. And to do that, I know right now, I think it's Davis-Price who's injured, not long-term, it doesn't look like at least, but he's missed a couple of days of practice. But those guys have to be right, and they have to be right the whole season. Because if you're not hearing those names early and often for LSU, you know, they don't feel internally that they're able to maximize their potential if those guys don't live up to the billing. And I would agree with that. At Alabama, I'm going to read you some names. I was just doing this. It was an exercise out in the newsroom with Director Colin a second ago. Colin works, well, obviously he works here, and he does all the late kicks, but he also does our signing day shows. Director Colin chops up some recruiting video every now and then, so he is fluent in recruiting, and he sees all the names come across his desk. So I said, hey, Colin, I'm going to bounce some names off of you. He said, all right, weirdo, go ahead. I said, tell me what you think about this list. Will Anderson, Drew Sanders, Quindarius Robinson, Dallas Turner, Chris Allen, Chris Braswell, Keanu Coate, Christian Harris, Henry To'oTo'o, Demoy Kennedy, Jalen Moody, and Shane Lee. And Colin asked me, wow, that's Alabama's defense, huh? No, that's Alabama's linebacker room, period. It's just the linebacker core. That's as insane a depth chart at any position group as you will ever see. You're talking about like Ohio State wide receiver. This is the defensive version of that. Alabama's linebacker room, I had someone text me the other day, and now I'm going to restate it because I saw we had a little glitch, and I'll probably want to use this as a soundbite. I had someone text me today, actually, and they said, Alabama's got guys running with the threes that I would feel totally confident building a linebacker room around if we were in another program. There are players like Dallas Turner, for example, was a 5-star, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite this last cycle. It depends on where you look, but you have him running 3, you have him running 4. I don't think he'll stay there. But when you look at the rotation there, you've got so many names. Virtually all these guys were 4 or 5-star coming out of high school, and none of them were overrated, I can assure you. And we've had some weeding out at this position, and even now, that's what that unit looks like. So I wanted to remind you just 2 years ago, was it 2 or 3 years ago? It was really multiple years. This was a glaring position of weakness for Alabama to show you how insane their recruiting is. And it seems like how quickly they filled this hole. In reality, it feels like an eternity. If you were watching Shane Lee and Christian Harris, both as true freshmen, when they had to start, I think it was against Duke. I think it was at that game, against Duke in week 1 of I think it was the 2019 season. Because they didn't have any, they had some transfers and then they had some injuries, and all of a sudden you're starting 2 true freshmen. I think that was when Dylan Moses went down right before the season began, and it terminally impacted Alabama's defense. You didn't know it at the time, but it terminally impacted their defense. You don't want to root for injury ever, but I'm telling you, they can afford to incur quite a few right now and still have all-American caliber linebacker play. This is the envy of the rest of the country, at least when it comes to linebacker depth. So there is nothing that you are not seeing there. Everything is as it appears on the surface. At Georgia, we got a little situation to talk about that has arisen since you and I last spoke. So we last talked to each other on Sunday. So it hasn't been that long ago. But we have an injury that's crept up at Georgia on the offensive line, and it's at center. So Warren Erickson was penciled in to be the starting center for Georgia. Now, he is a guy who got some action last year, but he wasn't a starter last year. So he is stepping into the shoes of a departing starter. And now he's out with, I think, a hand injury, and it'll be multiple weeks. And the smart money is on him missing the Clemson game at this point. Well, this is not ideal, but it's really not ideal when you consider what this potentially does to Kirby Smart's team and already a matchup disadvantage that they were going to have. Now, full disclosure, if you look at this Clemson-Georgia game, neither staff feels great about their offensive line versus the opposition's defensive line. It is a matchup edge both ways. Georgia and Clemson have two of the best defensive lines in the country. So this was already going to be a situation. Clemson's going to deal with this too. Injury or not, Clemson's going to deal with some pretty glaring mismatches on their front, which puts all the more pressure on a lot of those receivers and skill guys to make very, very big plays on the perimeter and manufacture some ground yardage through the passing game. So that'll be a little subcontext to watching that game. But right now, Georgia, Kirby Smart and Todd Monken, if you could go in those meeting rooms, considering what all we have spoken about with Georgia, and hopefully the ascendance of this offense to being a truly elite overall unit this year, I got to imagine they're looking around saying, well, can't do that if we don't have an offensive line we can trust. Now, I'm not suggesting to you we're throwing on the reverse lights and we're going backwards here on what I stated I expect from Georgia Sunday night. However, this is not ideal, obviously. Now, this is one where it didn't happen the week of the game, and so you're mixing and you're matching here. Cedric Van Pran is the guy, for the record, that is probably stepping in to fill the void here. But that is, again, to those of you who are unfamiliar with that name, that is a redshirt freshman who is going to make his first career start against the Clemson Tigers. Mismatch. Doesn't mean you can't win the game, but it just means it's definitely something that you're going to have to account for all night. And the nightmare vision that you get in your head if you're a Georgia fan is consistent pressure up the middle. Just consistent A-gap pressure the whole night. And at that point, when you're trying to develop a passing game that is predicated on things like timing and rhythm, and you got pressure right up the middle in your face, it doesn't bode well. So this is something to keep an eye on. Those practice reports over at dogs247.com, very important practice reports, because this is one of the most consequential games in the country, and it's happening in week one. I want to go to College Station right quick. I was doing a little digging today about the tight end situation at Texas A&M. So Baylor Cupp is a name that a lot of us who follow the granular details of the SEC have been excited about for a couple of years. And then for a couple of years in a row, Baylor Cupp, tight end for Texas A&M, has been lost due to injury. So we have not gotten to see him, and now, again, cross every finger you have. He's healthy right now. He's practicing, and everyone's excited. But I was over on our Texas A&M 24/7 site today, and I saw Jeff Tarpley had put up an article, and it's interesting because it was kind of taking a little hunch or a little speckle of an idea I had already had, and it was advancing it like 15 or 20 more yards. But it's this simple question. Are you going to get what you think you're going to get in the context of maybe having both of these tight ends to put on the field this year? I never pronounce Jalen Weidermeyer's name correctly, so I'm just going to say Jalen. But putting Jalen W. and Baylor Cupp on the field at the same time, this is one of those Xbox crowd dream scenarios where, oh man, if one's unstoppable, then imagine what both of them are. Well, what it is it's another personnel package. And in reality, as Jeff pointed out in his article, it could actually be something that gives you an unintended consequence of limiting the overall potential of the other. You know, Weidermeyer is a guy who has a skill set that is emblematic of what people expected Baylor Cupp to be. He's very versatile. I mean, you've seen him. He's been a nightmare. He is an All-American in every sense of the word tight end. And so the question becomes, when you've got a receiver room with the kind of depth that Texas A&M has now, and you got a backfield with the kind of depth they have, you know, what kind of personnel packages are we really throwing out there? Is it necessary anymore for those kinds of personnel packages to be out there where you got both of them on the field at the same time? It's good to have them. It certainly gives you more versatility and more options. I agree with Jeff, though. I don't necessarily know that the rotations are going to work out quite the way that I think you may draw it up on a depth chart or on a grease board or the back of a pizza box in the preseason. Having said that, still very excited to see Baylor Cupp. And lastly, certainly not the last time we're going to talk about this, though, Here we go. Knoxville, Tennessee. It has become my favorite position battle to track in the SEC right now. I was just over on the Vols 24/7 board within the last hour, and I saw that they had done a write-up on the segment that we did on Late Kick the other night about the Tennessee quarterbacks. Not only have I been riding the fence on this whole thing, I've been making almost a mockery of how much I'm riding the fence. Almost like a surfer on top of the fence, because that's how proud I am of the balance I have on top of this thing right now. No one knows where this is going. I was looking at the odds right now, because yes, friends, you can bet such things. The odds to be the week 1 starter at quarterback for Tennessee. Right now, Joe Milton is the minus 175 moneyline favorite. Harrison Bailey next at plus 190. And then it's Hendon Hooker, the Virginia Tech transfer, at plus 400, with Brian Maurer at plus 550. Director Colin, by the way, he knows the Tennessee quarterback situation like the back of his hand. I mean, don't we have to look at Hooker here? Don't we have to take some Hooker action? You need to be careful. You need to watch your mouth. I'm looking at the live chat right now. You know good and well what I mean. Hendon Hooker, I'm going to read you now from Patrick Brown's highly confidential practice report just released within the last hour. Allow me to share intimate details. The early vibes in preseason camp are Joe Milton, Michigan transfer, and Hendon Hooker, Virginia Tech transfer, are out in front in the quarterback competition, but Thursday's scrimmage, which is in the future, looms very large. Additionally, today, Joe Milton, sharpest of the quarterbacks, this again, according to Patrick Brown. If you want the full report, go to vols247.com. And they've really liked the leadership qualities of Hendon Hooker. My point is, I do not get the sense that there is overwhelming smart money in the room right now. I think that Patrick Brown's dead on the money, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to get into this scrimmage setting, and I think it's really, really up in the air. And so here we go. All right, let me balance myself on top of the fence. Check out this sentence, Colin. I don't know how this is going to come out, but I know it's going to be non-definitive. How do I want to phrase this? I'm picturing this on a quote edit tomorrow. I want to really, really make it look indecisive. Hendon Hooker could very well win this job, but you certainly cannot count out Harrison Bailey. All the while, many people think it's Joe Milton's job to lose. That's skill. That's nothing but skill. So that's a quick look around the SEC. Sunday night, here's what very much excites me, and really Thursday, we will have had several scrimmages around the league. At that point, we're going to have probably as good a batch of intel as we'll have all camp, because that's really where the weeding out starts. It's really where these coaching staffs want to start weeding out how many guys they're giving serious reps to, in all seriousness now, because what's happening right now in the first few days of install is they have measured the risk reward and they can afford to, run 4 guys in this position group, maybe even 5 guys in this position group. You cannot continue to split reps like that. And so this first scrimmage for guys that you think are going to be scout team, but we're going to give them a shot. Well, the first scrimmage really weeds those guys out. And then all of a sudden you see scout team jerseys, whereas you used to see regular jerseys, and then it's on. So sometimes you see that, sometimes you don't, depending on what the policy is at your respective university's practice. That's why some of the whispers and intel we'll have post-scrimmage 1 are going to be so important.